So, how well do the both of you think you'd fare on a seafaring vessel from 300 years ago?
I'd be dead in 2 days. I would blister from the sun. My delicate office worker hands would be ripped off by the first rope, and I would be too belligerent for a captain, so I would be flogged and thrown overboard.
I don't know if I'd last that long either. I think I'm out of practice of having to grit through things for a long time. And I can make myself uncomfortable for an hour or two, but once I'm done and I'm not playing anymore, you can't turn that ride off. You're in the middle of the ocean. You could be weeks from land. So that would be my problem.
I get seasick like a drunk dog. It's terrible. I'm a fucking mess. I am to the gills with whatever seasickness, motion sickness medicine I can find, like 3 days out from getting underway. Because what people always think is, oh, I'll get underway, and if I feel bad, then I'll take my medicine. No, it's too fucking late.
Yeah.
You're sick, and you're sick for who knows how long. That's the shitty thing about seasickness is there's not like one cause. There's like four different possible reasons why you get seasick. Some people, it's I can't see the horizon, so I have a balance problem. I have the weird flavor where because I'm rocking and rolling, my body thinks I've been poisoned. And so it will continue to try to vomit up that poison to get it out of my system. And 4 days in, I'll just be laying in my rack dry heaving and hoping somebody will kill me. So
Yeah. Your body thinks it's helping. Your body's like, don't worry, we got this.
we
Trying to get it all out.
Yeah. It's fucking terrible.
Did you not know this before you joined the Navy?
No, I didn't. I found out. It's a good litmus test. If you really want to know if you don't want to be in the military or if you're seasick, join the Navy, and then figure it out pretty quick.
Welcome to the It's a Mimic podcast, where you never know what you're going to get.
Welcome back to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're going to get. Today, we're continuing our discussion on DM tips in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'm Adam, and with me today are Terry and Robert. And this episode is called Ocean Travel, How to Avoid a Yawn Voyage.
In this episode of the It's a Mimic podcast, this panel of Dungeon Masters will be discussing the opportunities and inspirations for traveling by ship in D&D 5th edition.
But before this episode heaves some hose, I want to welcome Robert onto a regular episode. By now, you've heard his voice on a handful of the Platinum Great Worm episodes, where he and I have been slowly building a nautical domain of dread. And it's on those episodes where I learned that Robert, who is both terrorpickle and Shatner pants from regular mailbag episodes, served in the American Navy. As I was planning this episode, I realized we had an untapped resource that we'd be silly to ignore, so I approached him about guest starring, and I only had to bribe him a tiny amount. So, Robert, thanks for joining us.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. The bribe is commensurate with the amount I'm going to be actually like contributing or my level of talent in this. So, small bribe, small talent.
Well, we will ship you Dan. He should arrive in the next 3 to 4 weeks, as long as we remember to poke some air holes in the crate.
Yeah,
so, do you want to take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourself so that new listeners might get an idea of your background with both the ocean and D&D?
Sure. So I spent 14 years in the U.S. Navy, 8 of which were active duty and attached to actual seagoing commands. And in those 8 years, actually 6 of them were like reporting to a ship every day. That's where I worked. Even if we weren't at sea and we were just pierside, that's where I went. And of those 6, 3 of them were actually truly underway. So I've spent 3 years physically at sea. Longest stretch was I spent 23 months deployed. I left for a single deployment, and then that turned into a double deployment. And then at the end of that deployment, they said, congratulations, we're high-fiving you to this other ship who is 2 days into their deployment. And so I did 3 back-to-back. And the longest stretch of time at sea in that was like 76 days straight without going into port. And so, yeah, in that time, I've sailed from the east coast of the U.S. to the Persian Gulf about 5 times, sailed from Tokyo to Mumbai, India, upper west coast of India, clocking in about a total of 100,000 miles traveled on the ocean, which I cannot recommend in any way, shape, or form. It's not nearly as romantic as people say it is. And all that being said, I was on a warship that whole time. We used jet engines to drive that thing around. It's got 100,000 horsepower. I don't know a damn thing about the mechanics of actual like sailing. If you need me to reef my jib or mizzen my mast or any of that shit, I don't know what you're talking about. That's all foreign to me. And then, yeah, I've been playing D&D since the early 90s, off and on. Played a little bit as a kid with cousins, and then in college a little more. And then when it got big again with all the various podcasts that came out, my friends were like, hey, can you DM for us? And I said, I've never done that. Sure, I'll do that. And that was another mistake I made. And I've been trapped in it pretty much ever since. So, I mean, I love it. Don't get me wrong, I love it. But it's a lot like finding out you don't want to DM is finding out that you're seasick by joining the Navy, right? So
that was probably the best introduction we've ever had. That was great. That was really interesting to hear about your back-to-back tours there. I can't imagine what that must have been like. It's crazy.
Yeah. God, yeah, I could not. I don't think I've done anything for 76 days straight.
It sucks too. I mean, when you're in the military and you're doing something for 76 days, you're not driving around. You're sitting in one spot waiting to be told to do something. I had a friend who spent 110 days off the coast of a country waiting to do something, and the box they were in was 2 miles by 2 miles. They could not leave that area with their boat for 3+ months, and then they didn't end up doing it. They just waited. So, I mean, that's the military, right, Terry?
That's the military on all levels, all arms. That's hilarious to hear that the U.S. Navy is exactly the same as the British Army. And hurry up and wait. It's vitally important that you get to this spot as quickly as you can. Now sit there until we tell you to do something. And by the way, we probably won't tell you to do it in the end.
Oh, absolutely not. The person that's going to make that decision, they've actually gone home for the weekend, and we'll get them on Monday, maybe Wednesday at the latest, to find out if you're going to do that thing.
Right. So I think one thing that people don't necessarily realize about the military is it's mostly quite young people. Most people going around about 18. If you're in for 22 years, a full career, most people are leaving around about 40 unless they're getting very senior and they're going to stay. But 95% of the military is under 40. And these are all we're all idiots. Nobody really knows what they're doing ever. We're all trying to figure it out. You'll be rotating through deployments. So everybody's kind of new to their job all of the time. And a lot of it is just that. Everybody's just trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
I have no comment. I cannot identify. I was in the Boy Scouts. Does that count? I got to drink underage and poke things with a stick. So that was.
Oh, it's the same, except you're old enough to drink in the military, but it's the same thing. You're drinking and poking things with sticks. It's just the stick that you use to poke people with.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Robert, you've got an opportunity now to tell the internet about a handful of things that they might experience at sea that a landlubber like us might not think about. So here's kind of an open platform for you. Pop off with anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, so I mentioned seasickness a couple of times, and it really is true. Everybody does get seasick at some point. The longer you go without getting seasick, usually the worse it gets and the more like hubris you built up. I know people that'll be mid-sentence. They'll say, I've served 23 years aboard ships and I've never gotten it, and then they'll be vomiting on the ground because it caught up with them. And when you're at sea, if you're a passenger, it's kind of weird because while ostensibly you are the one paying for what you're doing, you're the reason you're for the voyage, you're in the way. Everybody else who is assigned to that ship, they are working. You are at somebody's place of work. They're not there for your entertainment. You are getting in the way. And it's very foreign because even if you share a common language, a common background, anything like that, once you're on the boat, no, you're now a foreigner there as well. They're using a language you've never heard of. They're talking about, larboard and starboard and forecastle and fathoms and shots and knots and nautical miles, and all these things that, unless you're engrossed in that job, you have no idea what it is. And if you decide that you want to be the crew on a ship and you join up, you're going to deal with a level of exhaustion you've never experienced before because you're working somewhere in the 16 to 18 hours a day. You don't bring extra people on the boat to also do work or to have backup. You travel with the bare minimum of crew because you're concerned about weight and space. So, everybody's really working basically double shifts. And then you get into a weird timelessness at sea that can be very, very difficult for some people. The days are incredibly long because you're working so much, but the weeks are just racing by. It's been Tuesday for a month, but this year went by in a week somehow. It doesn't make any sense. And the worst part of it is when you get back to shore and you get back to your family and your friends, and all of us, I think, have this little where our family and friends are almost like NPCs in a video game or something like that. Like when I'm not here looking at you, part of me thinks you don't actually exist, and so you're just going to wait for me to show back up, reintroduce time and life to you, and then you get back from being at sea for 6 months and nope, their lives kept going. they were doing interesting things. They've got new stories. They've got new experiences that you no longer have a frame of reference for. And you want to be like, oh, yeah, let me tell you all the cool things I did at sea. I pulled on this line. I pulled on this line for 9 hours every day for 6 months. And one time I saw a cloud. Oh, shit, that sucks. And that can be really difficult on people. And on the flip side, you get back from being at sea, and the only stories you tell are like, hey, I was at sea for 100 days. We pulled into port for a total of 5 days, so I had a good time in those 5 days. And then, your spouses or your friends say, oh, okay, so you were on vacation that whole time. Well, here's a child. You take care of this. I'm going to fuck off for a while because I've been working the whole time and you've been off gallivanting in the world. So it's those kind of breaks, you're separating your own personal story from the people who've been so enmeshed in it, and then trying to reintroduce yourself, that it kind of gets awkward. And then, there's going to be, if you're crew or if you're an officer on board, there's going to be levels of class warfare that you just have to live with. The crew will always be kind of, as people in a defined lower structure and lower position, there will be ones who try to get over one on their quote unquote their betters. They'll play pranks. They'll try and make you look foolish for not knowing what you're doing. And then vice versa, there will be officers who take advantage of that and, order the crew around just to make them feel lesser. I mean, there's just that level of pettiness, unfortunately, will show up just by law of large numbers. You got a crew of a couple hundred people. Someone's going to be a dick on that crew. And then to get away from kind of the people side and more to the the nature side of it, it really gets to you. It gets really kind of this existential ongoing dread when you are on a surface where you have no idea how deep it is beneath you and you don't know what's down there. We walk around on the ground all the time, and I can say, well, what's beneath me right now is the first floor of my house, and then the foundation, and then dirt all the way down. Whereas, I'm out in the North Arabian Sea, and we stopped to do a swim. Oh, we're going to do swimming one day, and a nice little morale event. And we all get off the boat and we're swimming around, and you get back on and you find out that the water was 3,000 meters deep. You have miles of something beneath you, and you don't know what it is. And that actually can be terrifying. But on the flip side, man, nothing beats the sky at night when you're in the middle of the ocean. When you have no clouds and you have, perfect visibility, and you can just see more stars than you thought existed. It's just this beautiful blanket above you. It almost makes it worth it. It's just incredible to see. And I'm sure there's some poetic juxtaposition of, being a little boat on a huge ocean and then looking up and realizing you're a little planet in a giant vast space of stars. So yeah, that's probably a lot of touch points on that one, but those are some of the things you probably wouldn't think of.
That's really fascinating. I love listening to that. That's crazy, because we think people that don't know, or when you're playing D&D, you're kind of just touching on the highlights, like the immediate highlights, right? We're having a battle, or we're going to talk about this for 20 minutes, and you don't know about the length of the journey or how insignificant you must feel, everything in the ocean beneath you, the sky. I think in the towns and cities, we've lost that. We don't see that anymore. Probably is what makes us feel like we're so important, really, and in the grand scheme of things, we're really not. But that was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to say that I ran a pirate campaign for 2 years, and we were on ships all the time, and the players were passengers. They were not officers. They were not crew members. They would help out here and there when there's important checks to make and extreme situations. But I feel like I probably did them a great disservice by not having the appropriate relationships between the crew and those in command and what was going on. Kind of the crew operated with one overall general attitude about everything, with a couple of this guy's got a foul mouth and this guy likes to fight, and it was very simplistic, right?
Yeah,
I would like to go back and revisit that now.
Yeah. Everybody was crew or officer. There were only actually 2 people on the boat other than the players. There was either crew or officer.
Yeah. And the existential dread of water is something that is not lost on me. I am terrified of the ocean. It is like a massive phobia for me. So I can't even imagine. My parents would go on cruises for years. They'd always say, yeah, do you want to come with? Absolutely fucking not. If I can't. I love canoeing, but that is on lakes. I am not interested in salt water. That scares the shit out of me. So, So yeah, the idea of going out, your swim days were just off the side of the boat in the ocean.
Yeah, you don't do this too often. Typically there's a maintenance event comes up where you've got to shut down all the engines, and you're like, hey, we're just not, everything's turned off, and so it's kind of safe. And then you go and you talk to people and you're like, hey, please please turn the sewage pumps off so you stop spraying shit outside the boat while we're trying to swim. Because I've been in situations where that was not the case. Yeah, they would lower a cargo net over the side, and then they would let you just jump. You know, you could jump. It's about, see, on that boat, it was about 30 feet, 30-foot fall into the water. And then when you were, just kind of swimming around the edge, and, they put a small boat out there, a little inflatable boat.
Sorry, quick little editor note here. The audio cut out for a moment. We do have audio issues all the way through this episode. I'm doing my best to splice it all together, but the point is here that Robert said that there'd be people out in a little inflatable boat with a gun to watch out for sea life and whatnot. So anyway, back to the episode.
It's always worrying because you could ask every single person who had that gun what their job was if they saw a shark, and 50-50 would be, I'm supposed to shoot the shark, or I'm supposed to shoot the person being attacked. And it was the real fucking Starship Troopers, shit right there of, I don't know what's going on. And then, you look it up and it's like, okay, when I was in the North Arabian Sea, there off the coast of Oman and south of Iran, I'll look up what's the largest predator out here. I'm sure it's going to be some sort of shark. Oh no, it's the flying purpleback squid. Flying purpleback squid?
What is that?
That's a fucking D&D game? Like, these things are, the giant version of these are between 2 and 5 meters long.
Oh my God.
I don't think that fucking guy with the M16 who can't hit shit, like, he'll hit the water. He's not helping me against this squid.
Yeah.
Or all of these snakes. I mean, it gets terrible. It even gets just dangerous. Like when we were trying to get back onto the boat because the waves were so rocky, people couldn't reach the ladder or the net. And so now we had a bunch of people in the water who had no idea how to get back onto the boat. And at one point, due to my height, people were using me as a ladder to climb back onto the ship because I could barely reach the bottom rung. So
you are 40 feet tall. Yes. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Man, I could sit here for the entire episode and listen to you pop off.
I'm fascinated.
Yeah. Terry and I are both sitting here sipping tea and listening. So, but let's jump into a quick info break.
We previously covered quite a bit in our discussion on Dungeon Master Tips in 5th edition. For all those episodes and more, you can follow or subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and dozens of other podcast apps. And if you'd like to support us, you can donate through the website, check our store, or join our Patreon and get access to other episodes and series. If you'd like to pay for some ad space on It's a Mimic, or just shout out to a friend, please reach out to us through our email and website that are listed in the show notes below.
Hey, this is Adam with a quick reminder to check out our Patreon if you haven't already. All patrons do get access to the Patreon-only Discord, but the real gem, of course, is the additional bonus episodes that you'll get. For Copper Wormling tier patrons, there are all of the Campaign Builder episodes, including all of Tier 2 and Tier 3 of play, and of course we're launching into Tier 4 pretty quickly. There's also 7 bonus episodes that Dan and I had recorded way back in the day that never got an official edit or release, and they're a part of this conversation as well. For Bronze Young patrons, there are not just the Legend Lore episodes that go into the backlog of 5th edition, but there are also some episodes about other tabletop role-playing games and the Legend Lore online series, which breaks down all of the D&D Beyond and online material for 5th edition that has been released by Wizards of the Coast. And then, of course, you also get access to the Campaign Builder episodes. For Silver and Adult tier, you get access to all of that, but also bonus episodes that have been released as supplements to regular episodes or are just sidebar bonus rants. And the Homebrew series, where I sit down and talk about how I handle different aspects of 5th edition in unique and interesting ways at my own table. There's also the Gold Ancient tier, which gives you access to all of that stuff, as well as input on topics in some future episodes, as well as a quarterly special episode featuring at least one host dedicated to answering any specific questions that you have about D&D, so it's kind of like a personal mailbag. And then, of course, there's a Metallic Great Worm, which you guys hear all of the time, where there's a Zoom call with at least one host that's going to be recorded and released as a bonus episode every handful of months. So for those of you who haven't checked out the Patreon or you're not quite sure if it's for you, I hope this breakdown helps a little bit, and I look forward to chatting with you guys at the very least in the comments on the public forum. Anyway, let's get back to the episode. All right, so before we go any further, Robert, you were talking about officers and crew, and so I do want to touch on this. We're talking about travel for the most part, but we do have to acknowledge the people that are in charge of the actual travel, right? So usually a D&D party will board a ship that is already running. It's not like they own the ship or they are the crew. Sometimes they can become the crew, but it's not often, right? So just to focus for a minute on what the crew has to offer in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. There is a captain who essentially calls all the shots and makes all the big decisions, a first mate who is essentially crew manager and people manager, a bosun who is, for lack of a better word, the mechanic and tech that makes sure that the ship is running and repaired, and they're going to be good at like carpentry tools and all that stuff to keep the sails up and the rudder on and all that shit. And you end up with a quartermaster who is in charge of the navigation and directing the ship. And then you get a surgeon and a cook. For some reason, a cook is considered an officer that is above the rest of the crew.
Yeah, I think whoever put that in there watched too much Star Trek, and they saw all the episodes where Neelix and Voyager was for some fucking reason the cook, and also at the senior officers meetings giving ideas, or when Whoopi Goldberg showed up to advise Captain Kirk. The cook's not in your typical ship. The cook is not going to be an officer. So
yeah, I think they included them, the surgeon and the cook, there just because like who else is on a ship, right? And here are the checks that they have, but they're technically considered officers in D&D. I would change that myself. However, there's also a lot of like non-officers that make up the remaining miscellaneous crew, depending on the style and size of the vessel. And for the most part, you're using the random NPC stat blocks you find in the back of the monster manual. So Ghosts of Saltmarsh also introduces the idea of what's called a quality score, and the quality is the quality of the crew, not necessarily the ship itself. And so a crew has an overall quality score that starts at a +4, and it can range from -10 to +10. What this actually is just modifiers you're going to add to rolls. So you start with a +4, and it's going to go up or down depending on fairness, health, casualties, hardships, and pay. These are all going to affect the quality score. If you want to put it up or down at all by any means, it's really up to the DM to choose when this would happen. And you can do it as often or as infrequently as you would like. There are no rules about that. It's just kind of use your common sense. If you want to know the level of loyalty of a specific crew member to the party, you just add 10 to the overall quality score. So it would be like you'd start off with a 14. Yes, we are loyal to you. We're at a 14, right? But they say you can also just use the optional rule in the DMG for loyalty as well, which is a numerical system on how to track NPCs and how they feel about the party and what they're willing to do for the party. It's essentially a numerical counter that ranges from 1 to whatever the highest charisma is among the playable characters. So you assign a bond to an NPC, and then every time that party does something that aligns with the bond or treats the NPC particularly well, you add 1d4 to the NPC's loyalty rating. Whenever the NPC is mistreated or forced to do something that is against its alignment or bond, you lose 1d4 loyalty. And 1d4 can be a pretty big swing when you're probably talking a scale of 1 to 18, so that's a bit intense. Anything above 10 means that they're fiercely loyal. Under 10 means that they're moderately aligned, and 0 means that they're neutral. You can't go into negative numbers with this system. It's not about hostility. It's only about loyalty. But why do I bring all this up? Because one of the main factors when you're dealing with a crew for an extended period of time in Dungeons & Dragons is mutiny. If a crew's quality score gets below 0, then the captain has to make a persuasion or intimidation check, adding the quality score as a modifier to the roll. So they should probably have some high level of charisma in the first place to counteract this. But if the roll is a 1 to 9, the quality score drops another point. If the roll ever gets to a 0 or below, because remember you can go down to -10 for this one, it's time for mutiny. Once the mutiny has ended, one way or the other, the score increases by 1d4, but you might still end up having a very upset crew, right? You still might be underneath the 10, right? So how to handle mutiny and the details of it and who's going to be in charge of it and what the roles during the mutiny are, that's entirely up to the DM, apparently. There's nothing in there on how to run a mutiny. Just this is how you get to the point where the mutiny pops off. So I just wanted to start with that because we're going to talk a lot about travel and hazards and encounters and stuff. And you got to keep in mind, this crew is going to be reacting all at once. And they are going to, for the most part, be acting as one single unit and entity. So, which is a little reductive, but I mean, with 300 NPCs, you got to draw the line somewhere, right? So anyway, let's move on to the actual travel at sea.
So for travel at sea, looking to, again, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, it discusses a little bit about the speed you're going at. It gives you in the different ship stat blocks how fast they're going to be going, and then it gives you some information on if the ship is damaged, if the movement category of the ship is damaged, how that then impacts the speed the ship is going to be going at, and it reduces it to per hour and per day travel. I will say, looking at the speeds they've got on the ships, a lot of these are pretty inaccurate for sailing vessels and rowing vessels. Things go much faster than they have, but if you've already kind of leveled a playing field so that everybody is going that same reduced speed, it really doesn't, I guess, matter too much.
I think the idea in D&D worlds is keep the map small, and so keep the travel slow.
Yeah, that would make sense. From there, we get into the activities while traveling. All of this should just be under the title of work, but it does give us 7 categories of things that the crew will be doing while they're traveling outside of just their normal work. You've got drawing a map, foraging for food, morale activities, navigation, noticing threats, repair, and stealth. The sailor in me is going to take a little umbrage at the use of the word map. If they spoke to somebody in the Navy, you do not have maps at sea, you have charts. Now, if I took it one level further and you asked me what's the difference between a map and a chart, I'd say the same thing. Chart and map are the same thing. It's just a chart that has depth of the water and is actively used all the time. They really back to reductive. They really reduced it on here. They say a ship's captain undertakes the activity of making a map. No ability check required. Well, that's bullshit. The ship's captain is not the one who's going to be working on your charts. Your navigator or your quartermaster is. They even have navigate further down in here. But making a chart is a very difficult, constant thing. And the captain's not doing that as like leisure activity. He's making sure that they're on the right path, going the right speed, that they're going to arrive at the right time, and they're logging the weird things they see or things that can then be navigational aids later. And it is a very intense process that requires a lot of math, actually. So I would probably associate a check with this, and I would make it a valuable resource before your crew gets underway or before your people get underway. They might be going and talking to ships that are pulling in and trying to buy charts off of people or trying to buy information about what they see in the area around them, what they've seen at sea. So it kind of bothers me that something that you can spend 24 hours a day working on is reduced to a couple of sentences.
It's also weird that it's the captain's job, because they go out of the way to say that the quartermaster's in charge of navigation.
Yeah, so that's something that you notice. We had a list of the surgeon and the captain and the cook and all this. Did it tell you who was driving the ship in any of that?
Nope.
Steering the damn thing?
No. Hold on. Let me jump to it because I skimmed over it really quickly. The quartermaster will be the one that I'm looking at.
I'm so happy that I'm learning these things, Robert, because then I can go regurgitate this later as though I know what I'm talking about, which I really don't. So.
You're quartermaster, and you think the guy you get your supplies from, right? That's the bullets and the beans. Yeah.
So, according to this, the bosun gives technical advice to the captain and crew and leads repair and maintenance, and the quartermaster plots the ship's course relying on knowledge of nautical charts and a study of weather and sea conditions. Nothing about who is actually piloting the ship.
Right. So, it's probably going to be a crewman who is under the direction of, at times it'll be the captain, or it'll be the navigator, the quartermaster, or even the bosun or the first mate. They'll kind of be giving directions, but your quartermaster, when they're working on the chart, they actually don't really have the ability to also be steering the ship because there's just too much math going on. They're doing a thing called dead reckoning during the day, where they're saying, okay, if we're traveling at this speed and in this direction for this many hours, I should be about here on the chart. But oh wait, I've got winds coming from this direction and I've got current coming from that direction. So let me go back and do some math. All right, let me get out my sextant, which is a device you use to measure the angle of something from the horizon to where it is in the sky. And I'm going to go and I'm going to point that thing at the fucking sun for 20 minutes and look at it and then try and figure out what my sun line is, or celestial navigation. It's incredible that we figured out how to do celestial navigation. It is incredibly complicated. You know, you're sitting out there at night and you're looking again at the stars. You're like, I think that one is Sirius. I think that one is the one I need to look at. So I'm going to figure out how the angle off the horizon is. Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to do my math, and I'm going to go over here. I'm going to look for another star. I don't know what that one is. I don't know what that one is. That one might be the North Star. Okay, I'm going to look at that one. All right, do my math again. And you're picking out those 3 stars, and you're doing your math, and it's been 30 or 40 minutes since the first star you actually got. And now you think you're somewhere in this 2-mile area. You can't do all that while you're also, you know, conning the ship as the helm. So you're probably telling somebody else to do that. But back to foraging, you know, fishing, that's what you're going to do at sea. You're going to cast out these long lines, or nets, drag a lot of nets, going through the water, and use those for your food source. Probably nothing really interesting on there unless you want to throw in like a random encounter, like you pull something aboard that you would then have to fight or, you know, talk to. Raising morale. So this is an important thing. And, you know, they've got the first mate only doing this. I think this is where your cook actually comes in. Food is going to be a much bigger, like the first mate who's like, oh, I'm providing instruction and I'm telling you what to do and I'm your boss. Yeah, that's all cool. Cookie made a pie and now everybody's fucking happy on board.
Yeah.
That's you know, so I would break from that first mate only to include others. And you know, they talk about giving extended breaks. I don't know how you do that because, again, everybody's working all the time. Someone's got to do that work. I would inject a couple of other morale events in here. So other than food, and this one's probably not going to be super intuitive given just the nature of most D&D players. Sermons, prayer. That's actually can be a huge morale event on board the ship, is you holding your services so that you can provide for your crew. I mean, most likely your crew is going to be, while somewhat diverse, from roughly the same area, and they're probably going to have a lot of similar beliefs. And a rousing sermon can be very uplifting, regardless of your feelings or your faith. You know, it can make you feel good. If they're well written. And then the other form of church, which we did on board, which we called smokers, would be the friendly boxing matches. You know, hey, everybody else is in church right now, but me and these other people, we're going to take rank off, going to put gloves on and go, you know, in a friendly way, beat the crap out of each other for a little while. And strangely enough, even though you might come away, you know, bruised or bloodied, you feel better. You've worked out some stress. Maybe you solved some conflict there, or you've just gotten out some of your general frustration with you know, being at sea in the world. I would not suggest wrestling because wrestling on a rolling deck can get real fucking dangerous real fast.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Yeah, we had somebody who used to lead yoga on board the ship until like the second broken ankle. So
Jesus.
Yeah. Don't do a headstand and then catch a wave. And this is the morale is where I would inject your players. I would have them or your player characters as a way to join in. I mean, there's so many things that they could provide that, you know, aren't listed here. If you've got somebody who has, you know, prestidigitation, I'm going to go help them do their laundry. I'm going to go get their clothes clean, or I'm going to help, you know, make the food taste better, or I'm going to use mending for those repairs and stuff. And then that can kind of both raise the morale of the crew because their lives are a little easier, but also ingratiate your players a little more with them and give you those chances to have those role play activities or opportunities. And then I've already mentioned navigating. It's really hard. It is really hard. It's a lot of math, and it's a very important thing because you can, you know, ground the ship and be in dangerous situations if you don't do it right. It does reference the Dungeon Master's Guide for being lost, and in the DMG, it gives you DCs for if you are lost to become unlost. And I found it interesting that if you are lost at sea, all it takes is a 15 DC to just know where you are, and then you're good to go.
That is a hell of a quartermaster you got there.
Yeah, that guy takes some good fucking notes. I mean, it only took, you know, thousands of years for us to figure out how to navigate at sea. But
Robert, you talked a minute ago, you mentioned navigational aids when you were referring to the charts, and I didn't want to cut you off at the time, but it seems like an opportunity now. What sort of navigational aids might you find at sea?
So at sea, you find buoys being left out in the water. And in the modern day, your buoy, the color of it, the shape of it, even the radar reflection of it will tell you information about that buoy. Some buoys are designed in such a way that when your radar hits it and it paints it out on your display, it'll actually spell out Morse code and tell you like, oh, that's that kind of buoy. Or, oh, when I'm coming into port, I need the red on my right and the green on my left of the colored buoys. And then on top of that, you'll be using fixed things on land so that you know where you are both both on your chart and where safe water is. So like a water tower or a bridge tower or things like that, these big things that are clear and you can see them pretty easily. And I mentioned a sextant earlier. When you use your trigonometry with the sextant, you can look at the height of that thing and say, okay, I know that it's 165 feet tall and I've got this angle of it off of the horizon. Do my quick math. That thing is 4.2 miles away. And so if it's 4.2 miles away over there, that means I'm going to run into this lighthouse that I wasn't looking at that's directly in front of me because nobody's driving the ship, according to, the D&D crewing.
Yeah.
Sextants essentially still the same as they were 300 years ago, or do we use computers and more advanced versions of that now?
I mean, yeah, we use laser rangefinders and radars and things like that, but the actual sextant itself, no, you go out there, a large amount of communication at close range and kind of navigation is still done with, analog tools, sextants, gyro compass. You have an alidade that tells you, which direction the ship is pointing, and you use that to determine bearings on other things. And then it's weird, but like flags and colors are things that can assist you. If it's nighttime and I'm looking at a thing on the horizon and I see a couple of lights, but I see the green light on it, like, okay, the green light is required to be on the port or left side of the ship. I'm looking at their left side. So that's probably their bow that way. They're probably going this direction. I better turn this way not to hit them. They've got these kind of flags up, these kind of shapes up. And that tells me that they're fishing right now. And, when the boat is out at sea and it says it's fishing, it could have 2 or 3 miles of lines behind it that it's dragging. So you want to avoid that. Or, they've broken their rudder, so they've got not under command. And so now okay, I have to stay away from them because they can't maneuver safely. So it's still a lot of things like that. You can do an immense amount of work at sea with just your flags and a whistle and your, like I said, your alidade and your sextant, and not necessarily need a radio or a radar.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you know these things like you do, it gives you the tools to have more interesting encounters because the variety of situations you could come across. You just named a couple there where I wouldn't even think to have that as an encounter, to have even just fishing, a ship fishing and what that means, what kind of state or equipment that ship will be using and what it means to the other ships. I wouldn't even think to do that.
Yeah. And you can really get away from the visual aspect and rely a lot on, other senses. It's a fog out and you hear these kind of whistle blasts.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned, 4 days ago that when the ship was getting underway, it made these kind of whistle blasts. Oh shit, you just heard the same ones and you're in a fog. You might have accidentally gone into port and you're about to crash into land. But that's probably a level of complexity that players may not want to engage in, but
No, but it's a really good point because we're dealing in D&D where we've got all sorts of ships that that don't exist in reality, or creatures that don't exist in reality, like krakens and stuff. So being able to notice threats like that or navigate around them, to be able to see, okay, if we see a spout of water coming up off the ocean, we think, okay, it's a whale over there, but fuck knows in D&D. Right. So the idea of moving and navigating and looking for other kind of signs and symbols, like if there are birds that are over top of something that you don't have anything on the map or the chart, rather, that like there shouldn't be anything here. Right. So why are the birds flocking over top of it and circling? Right. These are things to be thinking about outside of what we're already. Everybody knows about star charts. Right, like that's kind of going to be how they navigate. Or he's going to pull out a chart and a sextant and a protractor and a ruler and a couple of pieces of chalk and he's going to figure it out. I'm going to roll a d20 and move on, and that's fine. But knowing the other ways to navigate or the other things to be looking for is going to make your ship travel feel so much more realistic.
It's also going to allow your players to maybe apply skills that they haven't applied before to help out. How many players are going to say to themselves, man, my character's good at math. I can help out with some of this stuff. I can get in there and do some math with the quartermaster and help them figure out where they are. Your Circle of Stars druid, I bet he's real good at celestial navigation. So.
Yeah, and that's something that we should be thinking about when we create these kind of encounters as well, is how can our players contribute to this, right? Having someone that can fly, that can get up higher than a crow's nest to scout is going to be so much more worthwhile on a ship.
That does take us into noticing threats. And, ships have a watch at all times. There's a modern day set of rules and regulations called Coal Regs, which is run by the U.S. Coast Guard, that tells everybody how they're supposed to be navigating at all times, how they're supposed to, when you see another ship at sea, this is how you avoid each other, basically, or how do you safely navigate around each other. And according to it, you're required to have a watch on deck who can both see and hear. And so the obvious for noticing threats is going to be your lookouts, your people in the crow's nest, your people on the deck, keeping an eye out on things. But the unseen threats inside the ship are just as important. That guy in the crow's nest does not necessarily know that Bill sneezed downstairs and dropped his candle or dropped his lantern and then set a room on fire. And now you've got a fire in your ship, which is not where you want fires. And so most navies have a watch set up called like sounded security, who just walks around the inside of the ship, checking valves, checking equipment, and looking for things. So noticing threats will go well beyond just what you can necessarily see to the horizon. And it kind of gets back into the mutiny discussion earlier of are your characters interacting with the crew in a way that maybe the crew is more comfortable, bad mouthing the captain, bad mouthing the first mate in front of these passengers, because the fuck do they know? They're basically just luggage that we're hauling in a way that the officers don't notice because they're not there. The crew can, the characters can then inform them. But and then the last two for activities, we've got repair and stealth. I mean, repair is what it says on the tin. It has the bosun doing the repair. The bosun's probably going to be directing a group of people to do a repair, depending on how important it is. I mean, something's always broken on a ship by the nature of how, powerful and dangerous the sea is. But again, this is where, your wizard with mending can come in handy, or your cleric with guidance can come in handy to help out. And then stealth. Now, for stealth, it says that you have to do it in fog or heavily obscured situations. I don't buy that. You can have, you can just shut off all your lights, extinguish all your light sources at night. No one's going to be able to see you. Fog or no fog, you can be incredibly stealthy regardless. And then there is the stealth of deception. If you change how your lights are arranged, like I mentioned earlier, if I'm looking at the green light, and to me, that light's on the port side of the ship. Doesn't have to be. Somebody could just move that lantern to the other side and, confuse whoever's looking at it. The ship could be flying a false flag. The ship could rearrange its lights to appear as a smaller ship or even a much larger one. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into stealth or obfuscation that are well beyond, it's foggy outside and we're taking advantage of that.
I assume that if you're going to fly a false flag, that is a move that scoundrels use.
Yeah, it's a move scoundrels use. It's also, it depends on where you're going by. You might be using it to avoid being harassed by another country's navy. Like, we're from country A, and country B always messes with country A. So before we get to country B's waters, we're going to take down our flag and put up their flag. And we're just going to, keep doing that as we go by so that they leave us alone. But as a way to avoid those, not avoid, but to preempt those scoundrels who, are just out there harassing people.
Is that everything that you've got for the travel at sea as far as the Ghost of Saltmarsh has laid it out?
Yes, that's really all I have. The complexities of navigation are fascinating and interesting. But I think really in the world of morale and navigating, noticing threats and things like that is where your characters are going to find their best bang for their buck and give them those opportunities to interact with the crew, interact with the officers in a way that you can really exploit role playing. Yep.
All right. So I think that's going to bring us now to the idea of what's happening around the ship. Now that we've talked about the ship itself, and kind of like what we need to be aware of is environmental effects. Terry, you got a bunch of shit for this, don't you?
Yeah, let's talk about some hazards. So it's going to feel, I'm really enjoying Robert's insight on a lot of this stuff. So it may feel surface level, some of this stuff. And maybe as we go through, Robert will be able to give examples of where these things have come up in his experience, or the types of things that we may not realize that it will affect fire and that kind of thing. But yeah, let's go through some of the hazards then. So travel at sea is going to be dangerous for a variety of different reasons, right? You're going to be very vulnerable to some sort of things. Robert mentioned earlier, just reminded us how dangerous and powerful the sea is. So a storm on land is bad enough, right? It'll still cause havoc in towns and for people, but we can typically avoid the force of that, or get some sort of shelter. Where on a ship, it's going to be much more detrimental. So when it comes to dealing with hazards in D&D, at sea, this is going to be great for your exploration pillar. We can talk about some group checks and how we might navigate some of these situations. But I'll just give a reminder for everybody on group checks as well. So group checks, as the rules, you would set a DC for the group, and then you would get each player would roll, and you can do it as taking the average if that's the way you want to do it, or you can set a higher DC where all of those totals would contribute to a group total to try and hit that higher DC, whichever way you would like to do it, really. And then a few different types of hazards that we would have. You can use the random tables that you would find in Ghost of Saltmarsh. So there's a random table there. We'd roll a d20, and you may get a crew conflict, fog, fire, infestation of some kind, or indeed a storm. And then you can also determine the DC that you would like to use as well. So the first one I'd like to lean into would be a crew conflict. And Robert talked earlier about smokers. Smoker is a term for boxing and MMA and other combat sports, which is essentially just a not a random fight, but not like a professional or official or league type fight. It's people will do smokers for charity or just for practice, really. But I imagine it would be a way of settling some kind of crew conflicts as well. So crew conflicts. So sailors can be rough and tumble people, right? Very stressful, long hours, as Robert mentioned. And if you have personality clashes or vendettas against people on that ship, you can't get away from them, especially if it's people that you work with. You live, eat, and work with them in very close quarters, probably much tighter than most of us would realize. I'm sure Robert can attest to how close everybody is on that on ships. So crew conflict is certainly going to be something that comes up. So you can determine a DC based on whether it's going to be a minor scuffle, if it's going to be a large brawl, or even something as serious as a murder. And then based on the roles that the player characters would have, or if you're including NPCs, there would be a different type of ability that we would need to lean into. So if the captain, for example, it may be an intimidation check that they would do. They're probably saying for like the first mates, if we're looking to settle that dispute, it could be something else if you want to get more creative with it, another way to settle it. But then there would be different levels of success as well. So a total failure might be that the crew's quality score will decrease by 1, and that the crew may immediately mutiny, all the way through different levels of success, where regular success would just be that this particular hazard would end, or total success could be that it was handled so well that the crew's quality score may actually increase. So crew conflicts. Robert, what kind of things do people fall out about on a ship? Is it just being in the same space too tightly and you just get sick of each other and you're on top of each other?
It was a lot of that. Yeah. I mean, this person snores, or this person is disrespectful of other people trying to sleep. You got people that are on night watch. And so if you're sleeping through the day and then somebody comes into the room loudly, slamming the door, turning the light on, turning some sort of TV or radio on, and waking people up, that kind of being inconsiderate. And then theft is a problem, whether intentional or not. The second that happens, now it's a violation of trust. And at some level, you are relying on almost every other person on board to keep you alive. And if you can't trust them not to, steal your shit or go through your stuff, or even have the base level of perspective, let me sleep, show up on time for your watch, things like that, then you start getting into questions of how safe am I when this person's driving? It's one of those things I as I'm sure you experience with your service. There's a pissing contest between the services. The Navy and the Army and the Air Force and everybody. We all like to say, "Oh no, I've got it worse." No, you don't have it worse. I have it worse. I had to shit my pants 7 times yesterday because I wasn't allowed to stop walking, and bullshit like that. And I always told, my Army buddies, my Marine buddies, is like, I will happily admit there are so many scenarios in which it's so much worse to be that on the land guy, because, I'm taking a shower and a toilet with me where I go. And if I'm at war, I'm doing it with a cup of coffee in my hand as I'm lobbing missiles hundreds of miles away. However, I don't know of any situations where, an Army guy goes to sleep in his tent, and because somebody else is an idiot in his, platoon, he might crash his tent into a commercial tent in the middle of the night, and then he wakes up drowning. That's the kind of shit we dealt with. So I'd say the theft is probably going to be your biggest one that you deal with. actually on board the ship. Brawls and fights are not nearly as common as you would think on board the ship itself because, two people are starting to get heated. There's 20 other people in the room who are going to break them up or try and stop the fight or go get the boss and do it. Now, when you get to port and you're on port and people are drinking and maybe they're fighting over the same love interest, yeah, that's where your fights are going to happen. And so your character's probably not so your character might be involved in that, but that makes it that much more difficult on keeping the ship running and doing things correctly when your captain has to take time off of his schedule to punish somebody in front of everybody else and throw them in the break for however many days. So yeah, I'd say theft is the number one on board, and then just being disrespectful.
It's funny, you just tweaked something to my mind as well. Is long-term ship travel would be an absolutely rife opportunity for you to explore murder mysteries or missing people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well.
in an area.
And the truth of the matter is, if you're a criminal and you're wanted, fuck man, being at sea is a great place. You're going from port to port. You're hard to track down. Nobody can communicate with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get a lot of criminals who turn toward naval service or even being just serving as a crew member to get away from those problems. And then I'm rolling from port to port. Well, if I were a serial killer, this is fantastic.
Yeah, fair point.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I love it. Okay. Yeah, I just remember, I wondered what it would be like on a ship where you're packed in so tight. I remembered how frustrating it was living on a fucking tank for 6 weeks with 4 dudes and everybody stinks like shit. But obviously everybody would cleaner on a ship, but there's more people in a tight space. So I just wondered, okay, I'll move us along to the next hazard here. Fire, I'm sure is still terrifying on modern ships, but particularly if your vessel is wooden, I imagine. And when I think of fires in my simple D&D brain, I tend, for whatever reason, I tend to think that the fire would start on the deck outside. But of course, the galley can have a fire. There can be fires on any deck, really. I imagine it would be incredibly dangerous. Getting people trapped in certain areas. Is fire as dangerous as I think it would be on modern ships now, Robert, or do they tend to get handled quite easy?
Oh, fire is really, really, really dangerous because fire leads to flooding somehow in some strange, the calculus of the sea. When you have a fire, there's a chance there's going to be a flood. When you have a flood, there's a chance there's going to be a fire, and it can be just so hard to fight them. Now, I don't remember if there were any casualties with this one, but I knew a woman who served on the George Bush, the aircraft carrier, and she described a fire that burned for days. And I mean, they fought it for days, and it was like, okay, you can get your shift of fighting the fire is done. You can go to sleep now. We might have to wake you up because of
it's an active fire.
Fire might get in here. But yeah, it's a fire on deck is a probably a blessing because you can just push whatever's on fire over the side. But what you said of the galley, yeah, that's actually true. Hot grease spilling, you take a wave and something tips over, and yeah, you get a fire started, and then it's not just fighting the fire and then putting the fire out. I mean, when you're talking about in this time frame, you're not talking about like discharging halon and suffocating the fire and everybody else in the room, or getting fire hoses out that then you got to figure out, okay, now we have to dewater the space after we put the fire out. But it's things like, you got a fire in the galley. How much food and equipment did you lose?
Right. Yeah.
You said your primary cooking thing just got burned in a way that you can't use it anymore, and now we're switching over to hardtack for the next week. There goes your fucking crew's morale. What structural damage did that fire cause that we now need to repair or be worried about? So yeah, the dangers of the fire continue long after the fire is extinguished when you're at sea.
So now this is great because now this is giving me inspiration for threading encounters. Because say if this starts with like a combat or something, right, and somebody's setting a fireball or whatever, now you go into a fire hazard immediately after the combat. Because of the fire hazard, you're right, you're going to lose equipment, you're going to lose food. This is now going into a morale encounter, which could go into a crew conflict. And so you can make this at-sea travel much more interesting by just threading these encounters because of the consequences of the last one. So same as before, same with crew conflict. There's going to be different levels of DC, right? DC 10 might just be a small contained fire, equivalent to an oil lantern. You'll have to get control of it pretty quick, but as long as you've got somebody there, I'm sure you would be able to. All the way up to say maybe a 25 where it would be sudden pervasive flames, from from a fireball or something going off, or something certainly more intense where the DC would need to be higher. Again, you make group checks if you have player characters that are playing a particular role, if they're the captain or the first mate or the bosun, or the surgeon, they'll do a different type of role. A captain would maybe do an intelligence check and lean into his proficiency with water vehicles, over a surgeon can do an intelligence check and lean into the proficiency with medicine, so that would be it. That would be it for fire. And then again, the results, the success, a total failure could be that the crew quality score decreases by 1 as well. A regular success would be that, yes, you extinguish the fire, but perhaps areas of the ship, the hull or the galley or the food or equipment are now damaged. But a total success would be that the fire is extinguished pretty quickly and there's no further damage. So that would be for fire. And then fog. Again, when we start to come into navigation and the effects that fog can have, or just not knowing your immediate surroundings. Robert mentioned earlier, maybe you're traveling close to land and you end up making your way into port or close to land because you don't realize it because of the fog. So again, a DC 10 for this would be light fog, all the way up to very heavy fog with a much higher DC. Group checks, again, with your captain, your quartermaster, or whoever's the person who's on watch as well. And then a total failure would be that the fog slows down the ship and disorientates the crew. So maybe you're going off course, your pace is going to be reduced. Maybe you do run into something. If you have a success, the fog for whatever reason would have no effect on navigation. Or if you have a total success, because of how you handled that, maybe the crew's quality will increase by 1 or for 1d3 days or something as a bonus for handling that type of hazard so well. Stupid question, Robert, but I'm going to ask you a lot of stupid questions. Does fog come up a lot at sea? Is there a reason why there may be more fog at sea compared to land? I honestly don't know.
I don't know the exact weather patterns that cause it to be a problem, but yeah, there are times of the year where it's a guarantee. Like if I'm in this certain patch of water from 1 a.m. to about 5 a.m., it's just going to get foggy and foggy and foggy, and then you're not going to be able to see anything. And when you're in that low visibility situation, you're waking more people up. Hey, I need more crew up on deck. I need more people looking out. I need to be blasting the ship's horn every couple of seconds so everybody can hear us. And the fog has somehow bleached out my radar. So even my radar is not helping me. And you're kicked back a couple of centuries. So yeah, even in the best case scenario with fog, where you get through it safely and you're okay to maneuver, you have just robbed several more people of sleep by standing them up as additional watches.
Right. Is the activity on the ship the same all the way through the 24-hour day, or do certain things slow down at night, or is it just constant the same activity of keeping that ship running?
During the day, it's like any sort of I'm sure your experiences, you're going to be doing a lot of training. You're going to be doing a lot of stuff where it's like, I've got to keep up proficiency. So we'll be firing guns, or we'll be doing man overboard recovery drills, or we'll be launching helicopters, just kind of doing those training events. And then at night, you tend to try and slow those down a little bit. You're still, running your engines and you're still manning the bridge, but you're not necessarily going out on your announcing system and making loud announcements for fun, or blasting the bosun's whistle to announce the time over and over again in the night. But you could still be, launching helicopters all night just to do night ops, because they have a certain number of landings and launches they've got to do at different times of day. So nighttime can still be pretty active.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, we said a second ago about blasting the horn so that other ships know where you are and whatnot. And just to take us back to D&D for a second, that's a great idea. It's also a way to attract those scary things in the water. So I feel like that's one of those necessary things that you have to do around other ships. And so the idea of like merchant routes and safe water would be so much more important in Dungeons and Dragons, because this is where you have a lot of ships traveling together that need to communicate in these ways, that are passing each other by. There are a lot of ports and whatnot. And you have to make sure that, if a Kraken moves into that area and gets underneath the ships, every time that they've got to blast a horn, or they, even light lanterns on the sides to indicate, this is now also an indication for the enemy, right? And they're going to hear, they're going to come, they're going to disrupt, and we can no longer travel safely amongst ourselves if we want to be stealthy against the enemy.
It's also an opportunity, depending on how smart you want to play your enemy, when they are, when they're doing these repeatable things, or, I'm blasting my horn every time this happens, and I'm doing it at these exact intervals for this exact length of time, and I'm creating a predictable pattern of what me and my crew are doing, how we're navigating the ship. You've just given your adversary a lot of information as to how to come after you. Like, oh, okay, that guy, that dude with the ring of thaumaturgy who's standing on the bow and he's screaming every 1 minute because that's the only way we have to announce our presence out here. Oh, he does it every minute. I know that after he screams, I have 1 minute of silence to do whatever I need to do before anybody's going to notice he's gone, and then move on.
Yeah.
Or even to take it even a step further, I've got 60 seconds to replace him, and then I will start doing the scream instead as my ship of doppelgangers takes over, right?
And this gets back into your murder mystery discussion earlier.
Yeah.
That person who's, figured out, oh, okay, this is what the crew does at these times in this order that's normal, has a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, a ship will have constant routine. I was going to say the thing about DDs as DMs is you can't be an expert at every single thing ever, right? It's kind of our job to try and be, but we can't. Okay, I'm going to keep us rolling along here. So I'm going to move on to infestations, another thing which would be an absolute disaster, right? So, a small one might just be a minor bug or a rat infestation. If you can get on top of that quickly.
Food poisoning, stomach bugs, lice, things like that, nits,
Yeah.
People can't clean things. I don't, bed bugs would probably be terrible.
Yeah.
And, I read that back in the day, a lot of times the galleys and the places you actually ate down in the mess did not have any lights in them. You were eating in the dark because you didn't want to see what you were eating. And of course, if you're just in the dark all the time, it's easy for the rats or the raccoons to get on board.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, let me keep us going on to storms. And storms, I'm sure, are devastating, or can be. This could be maybe just like a heavy gale or something as a more simple one, but it could be, a higher DC, could be a hurricane or something much more overwhelming. Let's see again. So group checks and how your team can help this. With a group check, you could set a DC, but just to kind of make this clear, the role or the ability that each player character is rolling may change and should change based on how they're going to influence overcoming that type of hazard. So, total failure again, we're always looking to maybe reduce the quality score of the crew if it's a total failure, but certain pieces of equipment or the ship's components may take damage or may be removed completely, which means that they're not there for you to use anymore. But if you get a total success, again, I like the idea of increasing that quality score to reward the player characters and the crew for how well they've overcome these types of things. Robert, I'm sure you're expecting the question. Any stories of storms or anything that you could recall from your time at sea?
Yeah, God, a storm leads back into almost everything we've had previously on here. Talking about seasickness, everybody who doesn't get seasick, well, when you're in a storm, suddenly you get seasick. When you're walking down the hallway, the P-way, the passageway as we call it, and then suddenly you have to walk on the wall because the ship is tilted over so far, and then you're kind of Spider-Manning back and forth just to make it to the end. We think of storms and we think of these scenes in movies, people on deck and they're pulling on rigging and lines and they're screaming, get that sail undone and blah, 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 and there's rain pouring down. But storms last for hours and hours and hours, and you have to go about your normal life in a storm. So you're sitting at a table and the table goes 45 degrees. And everything just comes fucking dumping off of it. Great, there goes my breakfast. And that's, a minor thing, but that keeps happening and that wears on you. Or, in the modern Navy, trying to use the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's real cool when you got to have your arms and your feet and your hands on both sides of the toilet stall to hold on to keep yourself down on the shitter. Because
you better hope it stays in there as well.
And or in the shower, the showers we had, you're in a stall that's 2 feet by 2 feet, and you don't want to touch the stall walls. It's any public shower, you don't want to touch the stall walls of the public shower. But it'll always turn out that your cold water comes from one tank and your hot water comes from the other, and they're on opposite sides of the ship. And as you tilt back and forth, suddenly the water's ice, and then suddenly the water's steam and takes your skin off, and you're doing this weird juking in and out. So
have you thought of that? That's
there's just so many things of just try to imagine your normal day, everything you're doing, and you're in a room that's just rolling basically.
Right.
I don't really know what your characters are going to do about the storm. They're not going to stop it, but you can use that to introduce some levity of, falling out of beds or, falling down a lot. It's again, seasickness. We've driven through, a hurricane before in the Med. 15-foot seas, even on a 560-foot cruiser that weighs 8,000 tons, you start thinking, oh, we're going to die. Like we're going to capsize. Like this thing's going to go down. So there's nothing like the power storm at sea, and that can be a whole session of just really hammering home how dangerous this situation is. And then lasting effects, people that got hurt, equipment that got damaged, things got lost, being lost. I mean, yeah. So a storm can do all of these things.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, Adam, that is me for hazards. Unless there's anything else you want to touch on for hazards.
Oh God, I've got a million ideas for it.
Yeah.
Robert's just every time Robert opens his mouth, I've got 9 more fucking things to add to my ship travel. But let's move forward, because Ghost of Saltmarsh has a lot of really great surface level, pardon the pun, ideas about different things you can encounter at sea, and there are a lot of random tables to roll on as well. So jumping into it right off the bat, I want to talk about blue holes. And I'd never heard the phrase before actually reading this. However, I've definitely seen pictures of this, especially in like the Caribbean and whatnot, where the water is very clear and you get like aerial shots of a blue hole. And a blue hole is a large circular sinkhole in the ocean floor that can be up to 1,000 feet in any dimension. And it probably holds secrets, treasures, and fearsome enemies in there. They've got a D10 table that includes everything from treasure hoards to a sea hag and up to 8 marrow. That's one of the encounters. But I imagine that most of the big, scary enemies in the ocean would love to use a blue hole as a lair. Your krakens, leviathans, dragon turtles, sea serpents, etc. All that shit, right? It's going to be down there. If you've got an aquatic dragon with a horde, it might have made its lair at the bottom of a blue hole. So, because it's going to be damn difficult to get down there if you don't breathe water. There are all sorts of underwater environments. I don't want to go into them so much because we're talking about ocean travel today, but just a really quick ramble off. We have coral reefs and some rules and details about those, kelp forests as well. Kraken's Grave, which is exactly what it sounds like. Something called lure lights, which I wasn't quite sure what this was, but they're apparently hypnotizing lights underwater that are left behind by the souls of dead aboleths. And they will actually bring people in, and those people are not able to actually move further away from the lights, and they will defend the lights, to the death. And so these are actually very dangerous to trap people. We have what's called sapping snow, which is a real phenomenon, but we'll put a D&D twist on it. Sapping snow is when the ocean floor is covered in a white powder that is the dead organic remains of ocean life. So all of the like flaky bleached bits that just sit on the ocean floor. In D&D, you can infuse it with necromantic power and have it do 3d6 necrotic damage to the max hit points of anyone who touches it, if you want to give it some undead flair. Speaking of underwater adventures, there are canonized rules on page 203 of Ghosts of Saltmarsh for calculating complications around light and pressure at certain depths, but these are just really extrapolations on the ones in the DMG, and you will need the Dungeon Master's Guide to learn more about it. Essentially, if to break it down, there are rules for this. I'm not going to get into it. Depths make things dark, and they add levels of exhaustion to move through. And also, some objects will break at different depths. And there's a chart for that in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. So that moves us on to a couple of magical ideals. Terry talked about fog. Let me talk about eldritch mists. There are 3 kinds here. The first one is ghost fog. While in ghost fog, you have a 50% chance of running into 2d4 specters, which is deadlier than it sounds, and any living creature that dies there will raise as a specter. The next one that we have is the Shadowfell fog, and this is essentially, it hits creatures with a deep despair and fucks about with the mutiny and loyalty rules in minor ways. If things are not going good on a ship and they encounter Shadowfell fog, the morale drops in major ways. And then there's the wild magic fog, which just operates as regular fog, but whenever anybody casts a spell above a cantrip in it, you roll on the wild magic table that sorcerers use in the wild magic sorcerer tables in the PHP. So beyond the mists, Terry also talked about storms, and there are magical storms. When a ship enters a storm, they have a 5% chance to be surprised by magical storm. So you roll a d20, and on a 20, magic. Ghosts of Saltmarsh separates these different magical storms into the 8 schools of magic that wizards prescribe to. Just a quick reminder, there are more magic storms in Tasha's, but that's not what we're talking about today. That means that there are 8 different kinds. I have a d8 in my hand. I'm going to roll once for each of us and tell you what kind of magical storm that we've run into. So, Robert, I rolled a 2. It's a conjuration storm, and that means that when conjuring magic churns within a storm's heart, creatures of wind and rain emerge from distant realms to attack anything they encounter. The ship encounters 1d3 hostile air elementals just from entering that storm. Terry, I rolled a 5, and that means that you got evocation. These ferocious storms are racked with thunderbolts, driving sheets of acid rain, exploding meteors, and other dangers. After each day in the storm, every component aboard the ship takes 1d10 fire, 1d10 acid, and 1d10 lightning damage. In addition, roll a d20 and add the crew's quality. On a 10 or less, the crew's quality decreases by 1, and 1d6 members of the crew are killed. And then for myself, I rolled a 3, divination. When divination magic seeps into a storm, howling winds and residual whispers temporarily scramble the knowledge of a ship's crew. For 1d3 days, the ship's crew suffers disadvantage on all quality checks. So that's a lot of really horrible shit if you end up in magical storms. And they're all like this. You have one for like illusion and necromancy and transmutation, all that shit. So we also have rules about less magical things like sandbars and shipwrecks. Sandbars are exactly what they sound like. There's some rules about how hidden they are, how deep they are, how big they are, but they essentially just make it so that your ship runs aground and halts all travel, and now you got to fucking deal with this. For shipwrecks, we get another random D10 table. It's very similar to the one for blue holes for like the kind of shit that you can find in a shipwreck. You know, like 2d6 marrow or a young bronze dragon or giant crabs, whatever. But the last one on the list, alphabetically anyway, is whirlpools. And there's a surprising amount of rules considering the idea of whirlpools for both creatures and vessels that might get stuck in one. There are different sizes of whirlpools, each one stronger than the next, and it's expected that most of the officers on vessels will have to make various checks that have to be run at the same time as group checks for the crew. And if a creature is in the water themselves and not on a vessel, then it's nothing but athletics checks until they're free. Whirlpools are pretty scary. However, the interesting thing about D&D whirlpools is that they don't just take you to the ocean floor. They're instead a portal to another plane of existence, up to the DM's discretion. And the planes that are listed out are like the elemental plane of water, the elemental plane of earth, which now you just have a ship on a mountain. Underdark, Feywild, Shadowfell, Astral Plane, and then the Outlands outside of Sigil as well. So if you end up in the Planescape campaign setting. And then, of course, if you roll a 10, it's the outer plane of the DM's choice, which should terrify literally everyone. After all these sections, the book gives us 3 D100 tables to roll on for random encounters in open waters. The tables are broken up into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 to 4. And kind of rightly so, tier 3 and 4 blends a little bit depending on how involved the environment becomes in any given combat, right? CR11 creature can be a CR17 encounter if it's in the middle of a storm or you're fighting in a whirlpool or other shit going on. So these are all interesting uses for inspiration, but they are just standard monster fights or locations from within the book, like, oh, you run into a whirlpool or you run into a more powerful whirlpool. Actually, just seems to be mostly whirlpools, or a mysterious island. We end up dealing as well with a lot of crew, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later in the episode, about the random ships that you can run into and the crews that they have on them. But for the most part, they break it down into 7 categories. You can run into a cargo ship, a passenger ship, a fishing ship, a military ship, a pirate ship, a mercenary ship, or a ghost ship. And they're all pretty much exactly what they sound like. It gives you a breakdown for each one of them about what stat blocks to use and how many crew should be on an average one. The ghost ship, though, I just want to point out, has resistance to the following damage types: acid, fire, lightning, and thunder, as well as bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. It's also immune to cold, necrotic, poison, and psychic damage, and it can move through other creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain. It takes 1d10 force damage if it ends its turn inside an object, but me as a DM, I also add that force damage to the object that it was moving through, or the creature as well. Because I'm sure it's unpleasant. On evil ghost ships, the crew members are 90% skeletons and zombies, and 10% are specters, and the officers are wraiths. So we get a lot of different information about like random tables for rolling what you can expect on different kinds of ships, and so we'll dig into that a little later. But I want to talk about Mysterious Islands for a minute. We end up with Mysterious Island, and there are 6 different kinds. You have an alien one, a cursed one, hostile, a sanctum, one that's welcoming, or one that's wild. So alien is going to be your aberrations. Cursed is exactly what it sounds like. And so is hostile and wild and welcoming. But sanctum was interesting because those are islands where they don't want to fuck with outsiders. They're just not interested in messing about with you. So if you are going to approach this island, you don't know anything about it, you may just be met with hostility at first, but it could just be them driving you off, not going to chase you out into the waters like you might find in a true hostile island as well. You should be aware of the island size. You should be aware of the habitat itself. Like, for example, are there floating icebergs around an Arctic island? Or islands with jungle habitats are found in tropical waters. Like, just be aware of the climate you're in as well before you get into the different themes and what's there. There's a lot of different opportunities to come up with random islands. So I wanted to roll really quickly to see what island we would generate here. So you start off with a D6 to find out the theme. I rolled a 4, so that's actually Sanctum. And then we will scroll down to Sanctum, and it says the inhabitants of Sanctum Islands use the seas to protect themselves and their property, or to simply enjoy the isolation that a remote island affords. So the first thing we need to figure out is their leader. We roll a D6. I got a 4, so it's a noble. The island inhabitants are another D6 table. I rolled another 4, so that's 2d4 veterans, 2d10 scouts, and 4d10 guards. And then the island reactions. Again, it's a d6. I rolled a 6 this time. The inhabitants don't trust the characters. All charisma checks made to influence the inhabitants have disadvantage. And then you get a d4, which is your story hook. And every one of the islands or type of island has a d4 story hook table, which takes a lot of the pressure off of me as a DM to come up with a million little fucking islands in the middle of a coastal region. So I rolled a 4 again. I'm rolling really well. The island has an armory full of legendary, adamantine, and silvered weapons. That's your story hook. That's probably the reason that your ship is there, or the reason why they are trying to stay away from everyone else. So after we look at all the different mysterious islands that they have listed out here, there are underwater locations. And the underwater location section is supposed to be a inspiration, like mini maps. These are not a full campaign. This is just like a dungeon crawl, essentially, for you to go explore. Here's this fairly large region, and here's a bunch of details and a map so that you can just pull this out and say, hey, this is what we're going to do for a little while. They're far deadlier than you may think at first glance. This is a great way to help us design by example what you can expect when you come into a randomly generated shipwreck or an island or a coral reef or any of the other things that I mentioned briefly before, like a kelp forest or kraken grave. However, they're deadly as all fuck. So the first one that they give you is called Cove Reef. And it gives you a plot hook. It gives you a little bit of a backstory of the area, like a little history there in like about a paragraph. And then the features of like light and depth as well, because this is underwater. You can expect to run into sea life, kuatoas, hags, and a captured bronze dragon. And then at the end, you fight the CR-11 Merid that has been following you around invisibly the entire time and harassing the party. So that one, remember, you're underwater, so everything's different. All of the rules and mechanics in combat are going to be very different. So that one I feel is probably punching at a CR-13 to round it out. And that's, I think, probably the lowest level of the 3 examples we get in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Because the next one is called the Wreck of the Marshal. This is a ship that has wrecked and it's mostly submerged. You're going to run into more sea life. There's a bunch of undead. Harpies are a big factor in this one. There are marrow and iron golems and a couple of surprisingly high-level demons in here. And then you round out this little area with a dragon turtle. And then the third one is called the Warthelkeel Ruins. And this is actually a structure that's on an island. And it is going to introduce, again, the concept of more sea life here, but then undead and mephits and merfolk and lizard folk. Actually, if you interact with the lizard folk, they've got a series of games that you can play with them. But ultimately, you end up with the cultists and a kraken and a storm giant quintessent, and these are the issues that you are going to have to overcome. So we're talking a tier 4 party for the last two, right? Between the dragon turtle and the high level demons, or the kraken and the storm giant quintessent. It's interesting because Ghosts of Saltmarsh is a series of adventures that are classic adventures that have been repurposed and set in a Greyhawk setting. But these are three just like, hey, we used our book to make 3 random adventures as well that should take between 1 and 3 sessions, depending on how long they take or how long your guys' sessions are. And then, and here's the kind of shit that I would put in it. And so Wizards gave us these examples, and it's drawn out like it's a proper dungeon, which I really appreciated seeing this in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. However, I will be downgrading the difficulty level if I ever want to use any of these, because they seem deadly enough to not just be random encounters, right? So anyways, that's what we have for encounters at sea. Before we wrap up the episode, though, we've done a lot of lists and chatting, but I do have a handful of questions. So let's roll d20s. Let's roll initiative, because I want to ask some questions. But before we do even that, Robert, I got to ask, how well do all the inspirations across Ghosts of Saltmarsh reflect the reality of being aboard an ocean vessel?
So yeah, I hate to burst the bubble, but not much. I mean, it's not really that accurate, because a lot of these things are interesting, fascinating things that we in the boat world, the ship world, are actively trying to avoid. You know, I'm not interacting with a sandbar. I'm avoiding a sandbar. I'm not interacting with a shipwreck or a whirlpool. And, you know, the vast majority of these, when you look at them, are taking place either in a very coastal manner, shallow water, a blue hole. You know, if I'm 5 miles out in the ocean, I don't fucking know there's a blue hole under me because I can't see the damn thing. There's thousands of feet of water beneath me that are blocking it out. And then when you get into some of the more magical ones, the Kraken's grave, you know, if I read that correctly, that only affects things within 30 feet of it. Okay, it's really easy to be more than 30 feet away from something when you're in the ocean, especially if that's on the bottom of the ocean and you're, you know, on the surface. Now, interestingly enough, though, ships, you do encounter and deal with ships a lot more than you would think, because, you know, you've got this gigantic ocean you're on, and a ship, by comparison, no matter how big it is this itty bitty insignificant thing. But trade routes are usually very similar. Safe paths are usually very similar. The size of the ship, you know, of all the ships of the same size and make are probably going to go in the same route. So you see and run into larger ships a lot more than you'd necessarily expect. Sure, you can go days and days without running into a boat, or you'll see 200-300 of them in a day as you're, you know, driving around some areas that you have to avoid. So I would probably, for the at sea stuff, really lean into the weather effects of like the storms and the random ship encounters more so than necessarily the lure lights that only take place at 1,000 feet and down type thing.
Yeah, I feel like all of this stuff that I just listed off, or the majority of it anyway, are going to be coastal, right? Like when you, everything we've talked about before my little section was stuff that you're going to run across everywhere. The fog, the weather, fires on deck, crew conflicts, how to navigate the pace of travel. This is open ocean. And there should be a real sense of, hey, we're heading back towards land. That's when things, I mean, storms are dangerous, but land where ocean and land meet is where the real perils lie, right? And I think that's, at least in Dungeons and Dragons, although I'm sure it's true in reality as well, that's kind of the theme that my crew and my officers would know, right? We can't wait to get back to land, but the transition from ocean to land can be very perilous. So, all right, let's roll initiative because I have more questions.
Natural 6. So
You got a 6 in my online D20 roller here.
oh, we got a roll off then.
Oh,
I got a 10, so I'm going to be talking to myself this whole time.
a natural 20, which means I'm going to go second.
15.
All right. So, Adam, yes, Adam. There are 7 different activities listed for crew to take part in during ocean travel. Besides drinking and gambling, what's one other activity that you would add to break up the monotony? And one of the things that I would add, and we didn't get into this so much, Robert, when you were talking because you are a gentleman, but all of my crews are multi-gendered. There's romance on board, and that is something that I have included consistently for my players to have to deal with. You're trapped in an enclosed space for a significant portion of time, and everyone is lonely and away from home. There be fucking. And so that is something that I've added with, like, Terry, I don't know if you remember this, but Dan was hitting on the dwarven women on the crew for a while, and I was dangling a couple of like sexy early 20s pirate women at your character for a bit. And of course there was Irvindale for the girls to interact with. You guys just, the guys hated, because he was your wife's yoga instructor, and that you just don't fucking trust. So
I hated that guy. I just want to clarify for the internet as well that this was some years ago that these early 20s
oh yeah
was replaced. I'm 36 now. I was probably 29 or 30 at the time.
Yeah.
Or 34 maybe.
So I do add a certain amount of romance to it as well, because it's also short term, because you don't tend to do a whole lot of ship travel and stuff in D&D. You'll do it for a short period, and everyone can have a little boyfriend or girlfriend for a while, and then they have to get off the ship and say tearful goodbyes and move on to the storyline. So Terry, you're next. What do you add besides drinking and gambling and the work that Robert listed before?
I mean, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, that's basically Robert's right. You're working all the time. I'm trying to lean back onto what did we do when we run our own deployments, even though they weren't at sea. A lot of it is still work. We'd like to do, sometimes we do organized events where we would put on skits and we would impersonate each other and make fun of the officers and that kind of thing. So I would say some sort of, and that kind of goes in with how I'm sure you've probably got a bard on board or a troop of players or something like that. So I would maybe lean into something like that, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's classic too to think about, like, when you watch a pirate movie, the crew is singing as they work. Like, there is a certain amount of arts, that's on display here.
Right. Yeah.
And that cadence actually helps you, keep time with each other. You're all pulling the line at the same time. You're all doing the movement at the same time.
Yeah. Robert, is there anything else that we've missed? Do you have another one, another activity to break up the monotony?
This wouldn't be a super common activity, but it's something that, you do see in the navies these days are various forms of, I'll call them navigational ceremonies. So we have, in the Navy, there was crossing the line ceremony is, your ship crosses the equator. Not many ships actually do that all that time, and it's considered a rite of passage for you as somebody on board. And so, people would spend days and days and days, we're going to cross the equator in a month. We got to figure out our crossing the line ceremony, and we're going to nominate, you are King Neptune. You're the guy who's king baby. You're going to sit there without your shirt on, and there's going to be a cherry in your belly button, and they got to crawl to you on their hands and knees and pick it out of your belly button with their mouth. You're going to be the flogger. Try not to kill anybody. You're going to, and like, they would set up days and days of these, all day crossing the line events where if you hadn't done it before, you were a swab and you were new, and then you got to go do it. And, there was crossing the line, there was crossing the date line, there was crossing both at the same time, which side of the world were you on? Are you, and, if you've done that, you were called a shellback. So if you see guys with like shell tattoos who are in the military or the Navy, they've gone through this. They are shellbacks having gone through the ceremony. Well, you're a golden shellback or an emerald shellback. What are you? And I would use that, and I would really feed that into the crew morale, because it builds, it's hazing, but there is a level at which hazing still does build some camaraderie. So I would do that. I would try and put that together, and then I would make it probably a series of really silly skill checks for whichever players wanted to be involved in that.
Yeah. Now, I just want to go back to the oddly specific instructions you had for one of those people there. There was a cherry and a belly button that I didn't understand. We breezed off the flogging real quick there. And you came up with it really quick, like this was normal for you.
Well, I've never done it. I've gotten to 1 degree off the equator, so we never did it. But I've heard enough stories of others. I can't remember if he's called King Neptune or King Baby, but yeah, they would, like, as the final test, you had to go and worship before King Neptune, and they would have somebody sitting there with like literally a cherry in their belly button, and a person would have to go up on their, crawl over on their knees and get it out without using their, hands or feet. They had to use their mouth to get it. And then this is unfortunate. But you get a tendency of, well, I went through blah, blah, blah. So whenever I do it to somebody else, man, I'm going to make it so much worse. I've got all these great ideas to do these things.
That's
and then
never right. Yeah.
It's never appropriate. It's always terrible. And then, you get like, maybe there would be some sort of quote unquote light flogging, like, you're going down to be flogged. And, you'd be getting tapped with like a shoelace type thing. Like somebody would be down there because you've been run through the ringer for 6 or 7 hours, and you're exhausted and you're sort of crazy out of your minds what's going on. And now you're terrified because they put you in a room and they turn the lights off and it's flogging time. And somebody's slapping you with some spaghetti to try and with you type thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, stuff like that.
Okay, so I gotta ask, belly button aside, you got within 1 degree of the equator. Are you disappointed you didn't get to cross it? Like, is that a milestone that you wanted to hit, or do people not care?
I don't really care. Not so much. Also, the particular ship I was on at the time, it would have been actually it would have been a conflict. It would have been a problem because the command I was with was a 3-star admiral called the Numbered Fleet, so very high up, in the military, and we were embarked on another ship. So we weren't ship's crew, and ship's crew would be the one, they had their own separate captain, their separate executive officer, the whole crew. We were there because that's where we were supposed to be. So if we tried to participate in that crossing of the line ceremony, yeah, there would have been a lot of very unpleasant class warfare and getting even for perceived slights. So, but other than that, I mean, no, I'm good. I did enough bullshit at the ocean, and I've spent enough time on it that I'm not worried about my wave cred.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
The hazards all give a mechanical aspect to them in Ghost of Saltmarsh. Do you like how they're broken down, or would you do something different? I don't know. I think the fire stuff, the fog and infestation storm is like, they're more about an inspiration for where you get started. I would be adding additional mechanics to it, or glancing off of this as I'm just like, oh, it's a random encounter of a patch of fog. We'll deal with this for a little bit, roll a couple of group checks, and then move on, right? Like, I am probably going to mess with them depending on how zoomed in I am, whether or not this is a aquatic or naval campaign versus a stretch of we need to be on a ship to get to a place, right? Because by the time that I'm in session 45 of my aquatic campaign, the idea of coming up against an infestation is probably just going to drag the campaign down, and we will have done it 3 or 4 times. So here's a more basic role that this happened again, and I will narrate my way through it after, I don't know, someone makes a roll, right? So as opposed to if it's just like a stretch of going down the coast for 7 or 8 days, I'm really going to lean into these hazards and have them be really important, because this is the feature. We are on a ship. This is the only time we will be on a ship this campaign. So let's zoom in on it.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you, Adam. It's better to have fewer mechanics so that you can breeze through it pretty quickly if it makes sense for the campaign or the session, and then have the option to add mechanics if you want to zoom in more. Maybe you've got multiple fires that are going at the same time, and the crew has to determine who's going to tackle which one, and so you could do multiple roles for the success of how they extinguish each fire in different areas. So you can make it more complicated if you want to, if that's going to lean into the fun. But if you need it to be simpler because this should just be quick, or you're right, we're past the point where infestations are fun for this level 12 party or something, we should be able to move through it quickly if we want to. So I would be in agreement with you on this.
Yeah, I'm just going to parrot both of you that, yeah, that's I like that they do have a mechanical aspect to them, because there is an inherently mechanical aspect and nature to everything you're doing, because you're on essentially a giant machine trying to fight a natural killing machine while you're sailing. But I really like what Terry was saying earlier of, use these things to then inspire you for compounding stuff later. That fire damaged that thing, and now we need to either find a new thing or we need to find a way around that, and then loop in kind of what Adam was saying with the can you use that to then drive personal interactions between the crew and the people who are the players. Can you go from there was a fire in the galley to this big sad scene as these 2 romantic partners are leaving each other as the characters getting off on the pier, and they're going back to the ocean because, oh, you saved me from the fire, or you saved me afterwards, or blah blah blah. Use them as the springing off point, but also use them early on to be like, hey, the ocean's really fucking dangerous. Don't be stupid here. Like, don't think you can set the bar on fire, because the bar's in the ship and it'll kill you.
So I listed off a bunch of environments. Is there a specific environment or one of the hazards that inspires you the most for a set piece encounter that you'd make for your players? There's lots to work off of here. There are some really neat ones. I am always going to be enamored by the romanticism of exploring a shipwreck. That's probably my favorite, just from the media that I've consumed over my lifetime of sunken wrecks and pirate ships and cargo holds and creepy undead walking around. Like, I don't know, shipwrecks are very interesting to me, especially because you can put just about any kind of plot hook within a shipwreck.
For those of you who can't see at home, Adam is currently showing off his giant Billy Zane from Titanic tattoo on his shoulder because that really inspired him as a younger man.
I wanted to put it over my heart, but I just figured that the necklace deserved the spot of honor, right?
Yeah.
Okay, for the ones that I'm most inspired for set piece encounters, I don't think so. I think what I'm most inspired about is how I can use multiple of these things at once, right? So how can I blend an infestation with a fire? Well, if the fire is raging, all of a sudden the rats are moving, and they're all going at the same time, and so now dealing with this fire is even more difficult. The likelihood of disease occurring at the same time, or maybe there's something a storm may be raging, which creates a fire, or which again makes the rats move, or whatever. So it's not that there's a particular thing for me. It's that I feel more empowered after speaking to Robert to know what is more likely going to happen in each of these situations, so that I can blend them together more creatively.
Well, you just sparked something for me right now about the blending of them together, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking a storm is the beginning of whatever your problem is, clearly, right? Like storms will just pop that shit off. But it occurred to me that on a D&D ship, you probably have like a sick bay, right? But you probably also have like an apothecary cabinet where your magic components and magic items in there will be jostled around and potentially spilled, mixed, lit on fire, something. And that right there is enough to blow a hole in the side of the ship or summon a djinn or do like it, God fucking knows what, just because the storm was jostling that shit around, right?
What are we transporting this week? It says here we've got 800 barrels of alchemist fire.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
That's fair. Hey, how come just on components there real quick, how come component pouches are never affected when the wizard goes underwater? Surely it's got to be like your iPhone, right? Like this isn't working anymore, whatever it is. That might be a little bit too detailed, but still true.
No, I absolutely 100% think that we should be doing what, like when you get wet, you've got to deal with that afterwards. It's just a level of realism that most D&D players don't want to deal with. So a lot of people will hand wave it. But for everybody that loves to do like gritty campaigns and like the real world takes a week to heal to get a long rest, that kind of shit. Yeah, think about water, because water will fuck up everything, right? Think of a wizard's spell book that gets wet.
For me, for Environs, kelp forest. I like the kelp forest. I think you can have a lot of fun with that because it is not it's not immediately threatening. It's not this dangerous thing like a whirlpool or a storm. And when you're dealing with things like kelp, it could be some sort of fast growing thing. And it's a magical world. I mean, you could be sailing and you have a kelp forest that continues to extend straight above the waterline, straight up in the sky, 200-300 feet. And for some reason, everything in there is still acting like it's in the water. So you have fish still swimming up in this column, moving around, and or when you enter it, your players can now swim up through it, and then you've got this mysterious forest. I'm gonna put in a sea hag and a sea hag's cottage somewhere in the kelp forest to deal with. So that's the kind of thing I'd want to try and flip those a little bit so that the ones that are naturally not dangerous are now interesting, and then you can put them in the way so that people can't just steer around them. Though of course I don't know if you call it necessarily a set piece, but you can really do a lot with a lot of impactful stuff with your random ship encounters. Do you encounter a ship that then follows you? Do you encounter a ship that drives a moral question for your characters as they then try and figure out how do we address this or how do we help them? I had a ship that picked up two guys that were adrift at sea because their dhow had burned in the Middle East. I've also seen, and this back to the very beginning of things that are harrowing at sea, I saw 3 small fishing vessels, 30, 40 feet long, normally crew 10, 15 people, chugging along, and each of them probably had 300 or 400 people on them. There were people who were hanging over the side, being held by their hands by people on deck. And these things were putting along at a mile an hour, and they were escaping to the safety of Somalia from where they were.
Jesus.
So that's like you have a bleeding heart, super good party. Here is a ship full of refugees.
Mhm.
Oh shit, how do we help them? Can we help them?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
how do we feed? Can we bring them on board our ship? Yes or no? How does the captain, the crew respond to this?
Right.
What are they running from? What information do they have? Like, what are we going to do with this? And
Are we inviting disease on board? If they're sick and injured, right?
disease or other problems like the two guys we picked up informed us that they had originally been three, but the third guy was going through severe heroin withdrawals and was being scary. So they went ahead and knifed him and pushed him out in the ocean from their little raft. So like that's people who have been at sea for 7 or 8 days who are just focused on survival, and then they come across you and you're well outfitted ship and you're being very helpful, might have a drastically different moral compass of survival at that point.
You definitely have to account for the idea of desperation
Yeah.
when you're dealing with ships and people at sea.
Crazy, man.
A lot of the random encounters that we have are with creatures who cannot leave the water. How would you handle it if you randomly rolled 1d10 killer whales or 1d6 giant seahorses or 2d4 reef sharks? Like, is that even really a fucking encounter, or is it just a hey, you see this off the side of the ship? I tend to have them there I roll a lot of just environmental or social random encounters as well. I am very famous for having more than just combat encounters be on my random tables. So this doesn't really bother me that much. It lets me focus in on an interesting detail to bring to my players so that they can watch some bioluminescent whatever off the starboard bow that moves with the ship for the next couple of hours, or you can hear the mournful song of a lonely humpback whale, or just these things that are going to fill the campaign with details about ocean travel that you're not going to get into if you're like, oh, I rolled a Hydra. Like, yes, it's fantastical. Yes, it's Dungeons and Dragons. And yes, it's combat, which is what all the characters are built to do, but it's not world building, right? I mean, it can be to a degree, but it's a little detail. So I don't mind these little bits and pieces where we don't have to go hunt a bunch of reef sharks or hunter sharks or a plesiosaur, right? We just see it, and that's neat, or hear it, right? Or fuck, smell it. The ocean has smells, right?
Yeah, I think for me, it's what are they doing? They're not just hanging out. It's like, okay, how do you handle, maybe you see some orcas or something. Orcas are probably hunting. Maybe they're hunting something which you need to not die, or maybe it's a merfolk or something, and they're asking you for help. Like there's reason. It depends what the creature is doing. Also, they can just become part of a secondary part of another encounter. Adam, you like shipwrecks, for example. Shipwrecks become these creatures' homes. I went a lot of years ago. I went scuba diving in the Red Sea with the army, and I remember doing some wreck diving there and swam into a room on a wreck, and there was 3 lionfish hanging out in there. Shit my pants because you can't touch them, right? I'm trying to swim backwards now out of this room, and my buddy who was with me was trying to push me into the room because he wanted to go into the room, but he didn't see what I had already seen around the corner. But that'll be the case, right? If you can do a little kind of mini underwater dungeon crawl on the shipwreck, and you can have different creatures in different rooms doing different things, now you can still work with some poisons and that kind of thing. So I would use them as secondary parts of another encounter.
Yeah, I think it's a good question to ask is what are they doing? Are they hunting? What are they hunting? If there's a bunch of reef sharks that are spiraling around somewhere, then that means probably there's blood in the water or something's hurt. We often see these animals and we don't really apply a level of intelligence to them, but I've read enough stories of, this bird was annoying a person until they followed the bird, and it turns out that the bird's mate was trapped in a Coke plastic bottle ring of some sort. So there could be a chance that one of these animals, a perfectly normal animal, is seeing a boat and saying like, I need help, and trying to lead you somewhere. Or you could always use it just to inject a little bit of character from a crewman. The characters are all looking over the side and a giant seahorse goes by, and then now you've got, crazy wooden tooth Steve is talking about the story of the giant seahorse and what it actually means. And actually, no, that's the soul of a dead horse that actually was at sea, and all these kind of, weird little tales they could be telling. But I would say you really got to encourage, when you have the players who are trigger happy and you say, oh, I got 1d10 killer whales, they got a stat block, or reef sharks, they got a stat block. And you have that dumbass who jumps over the side to go fight them. That guy's gone. Like I mean, it is really hard to turn a ship around to go get somebody.
Mhm.
And we're traveling fast enough. And oh, okay, my paladin jumped over the side and he just smited that giant octopus that was just there and being chill. Cool. Are you in plate mail? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
octopus is not the only thing in the sea as well.
Right, right.
You said a second ago it's hard to turn a ship around, and this was something that I was acutely aware of when I started running my pirate campaign, which is why I put a rowboat off the side of the ship to be able to get to and from land, and also to be able to get ship that has fallen overboard. And so if anyone is going to be running a pirate campaign, or they're listening to this episode in preparation of something, you need small, like, what are they called, Robert? The craft that goes from ship to land. Is there a general term for it?
A lifeboat. We call them a rib, rigid hull inflatable boat. But yeah, typically you've just got the small boat or the captain's gig. Captain will have a small additional times, but yeah, that's what we refer to them as. So
okay, cool. My last question is, the mysterious islands seem to mostly just be homes for specific creatures. That's what they give us. So what's a piece of advice for other DMs when it comes to fleshing out random island encounters to be more memorable? And my first thing is going to be the barrier between your ship and standing on the land and talking to them. You've got to get from your ship and you have to get ashore. And sometimes that barrier is going to be the fact that you don't have a smaller vessel, and so you've got to swim, or you've got to actually run your small craft, like let's assuming you're just on like a little small yacht or something. You run it aground and swim or walk your way or climb down the netting. Or sometimes the barrier is going to be a reef that's going to hold you back, or a sheer cliff that you want to get up to the civilization, but this island has 80-foot cliffs on all sides. How are you getting up there, right? So it should be a detailed complication for the players to overcome to get from the safety of their ship to suddenly be talking to whoever's on the island.
Yeah, I love it. I think for me, it's always about the challenge, right? That's what makes things more memorable. For me in D&D, nothing should ever be convenient for the players. It should always be difficult. The bad thing should always happen at the worst time. And so you need some sort of invitation, some sort of exciting thing that makes the players want to engage with that island or those people that are there. Maybe it's just that as you look through your spyglass or something, you identify things can be used for spell components or equipment, or maybe they have food and all your food burned or got diseased or something. And so something that makes them want to go there, but then there needs to be a chance they're not friendly, or the island itself looks diseased, or whatever. So I'm always trying to lure my players into things by making it very exciting and attractive for them, but then always making it inconvenient and difficult for them along the way. So as long as you're balancing those two things, just like any other encounter, an island shouldn't be boring. Instead, it just kind of becomes like a sandbox of where you can put all of your favorite things in a fixed location where the players can't really escape it. They can't really run away from the island.
So one thing I noticed when I'm looking at these, the mysterious islands as I go through them, I'm looking at the inhabitants and I'm not really noticing a lot of naturally, seagoing or water creatures in the first place. All of these are beings that would just live on land anywhere else. And so I'm thinking about what kind of methods do they have for traveling in the immediate area around their island? How are they getting to and from it themselves? And, introducing, more ships, more things like that. But also, things get interesting in the ocean when you're not just dealing with the weather or your own boat, but there's another boat now there that you're having a problem with. So what if your boat, as it's pulling into this island, is seeing, oh, there's another ship already here that arrived yesterday that's dealing with these locals already, or is trying to leave? Or, are you going to be working at cross purposes with their crew? Or are you going to be working with them? Now you've got a third aspect to that, interaction triangle of, we're talking to both the people on the island and to this other ship that may or not be stuck here. Which one are we going to work with? So I would introduce, more ships.
Yeah, that's a great idea. But before we go any more overboard with this topic, let's cut to a quick info break.
If you've been inspired by the conversation in this episode, please feel free to reach out and share your creativity and ideas with us and the rest of the community. You can reach us on Facebook and Instagram, or on our subreddit r/itsAmimic. Also, if you're feeling particularly generous, please follow and subscribe, and leave us positive reviews, likes, and comments. Engagements like that help us pop up on search engines and keep this show running.
All right, so there are a bunch of ships, a bunch of ship details that I promised we would get to later. And so I want you guys, I hope you have dice because we're going to roll randomly and see the kind of ships that each of you are going to get. So I'll get you to roll some dice and I'll read out off of the random tables what you've rolled. And we'll see what kind of ships and crews and whatnot, the details that we can come up with. Do you guys want to roll initiative first with a D20 roll?
17.
What'd you get, Terry?
17.
All right, Terry, we're going to go through all yours first. We're just going to hit it all to get an idea of what your ship looks like, and then we'll do Robert's.
All right.
So give me a percentile dice roll.
Okay.
This is going to determine your ship type, right? And that's essentially how large your ship is.
34.
That gives you a long ship.
Okay, nice.
So a decent size. Can you roll 2 D20s so we can come up with your ship name? There are 2 columns here. So you have one word and then the second word, usually an adjective and then a noun.
I rolled a 16 and a 7.
That means that your long ship is going to be called the Royal Flower.
Okay, on brand, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Let's roll for, they've got again, it's going to be 2 D20s for crew member names, but we're just going to do for your captain only. So can you roll 2 D20s again?
Yeah, 4 and 16.
The captain of, what was it, the Royal Flower is known as the Golden Liar.
Great. Okay.
Roll percentile dice to find out what your ship purpose is. This is what I mentioned before: cargo, passenger, fishing, all that stuff.
74.
It's a pirate ship.
Oh, nice, with the Golden Liar.
With the Golden Liar, yeah. So you've got bandits and bandit captains and pirate bosun. A lot of these are the NPC stat blocks from either the monster manual or Ghost of Saltmarsh itself. You also get 1 pirate deck wizard, so that's fun.
Yeah, sure.
You got to roll a d6 to find out if you're friendly, neutral, or hostile.
5.
So you are hostile. You are a hostile pirate ship called the Royal Flower. And let's roll to see who is actually on the ship. So roll percentile dice to find out the kind of creatures.
57.
Knowles, the Golden Liar, runs the Knoll pirate ship called the Royal Flower. And we have one final. We have one final bit, which is a ship disposition, which kind of gives us more than just the attitude, but the state of the ship itself.
Okay. Sorry, what was the die?
D10.
3.
You guys need help with your purpose, and so it breaks down kind of what that means. The ship's crew is looking for help with their purpose and approach the characters, asking for direct aid in a task. For instance, mercenaries asking for help mapping an unexplored area, or a cargo ship's crew asking the characters to serve as guards, stuff like that. So your evil pirate ship of Knowles, that is hostile as all hell, actually needs something from the party.
Ooh, interesting.
I would love to see that encounter, as the Golden Liar and his sorcerer, the wizard, are being very friendly and talking to the crew of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
As you hear the Knolls who are below deck just like howling and hammering to get out. Just, don't worry about them. They're fine.
Yeah.
We put them below decks for your safety, but we better hurry.
Yeah, completely ignoring it. Just like, nope, just paying no attention. Don't worry about that noise.
I do that with my dog when she's making a noise. I said, don't look at her. Just ignore her. If you look at her, she'll keep going.
All right, Robert, let's do it for you now. Can I get percentile dice?
I rolled an 89.
An 89. You got a warship. That's on brand, isn't it?
Yeah.
2 D20s for the ship names.
7 and 11.
Your ship's name is the Drunken Mermaid. That's your warship.
Perfect.
2 more D20s for your captain's name.
Dangerous. I got a 2 and a 19.
Is Ol Maps. That's his name. Is Ol Maps. Who runs the Drunken Mermaid warship. Let's see what your purpose is, because you might not actually be military. It might be a repurposed warship. So that's a percentile dice.
66.
It actually is military. So let's find out what the attitude is, though. So let's roll a d6 to see if they're friendly, neutral, or hostile. You rolled a 5.
Yep.
So just like Terry, so it's hostile again. And roll percentile dice to see what kind of races are on it.
33.
So this is going to be hobgoblins, which sounds absolutely terrifying. We just went full militant with this entire one so far. We're going to need a D10 for the ship disposition.
9.
And 6 to 10 is just no special disposition, which means that you're probably just going about the hostility of hobgoblins, right? dispositions listed are diseased, help with purpose, mutiny, so they're in the middle of a mutiny, and or they're trading, or one called emergency, which has a further D4 table, which includes like the crew is lost or they're stuck on a sandbar or something like that, right? So but yours is just operating at peak operating values, I guess. So
And that works out so well because who's the captain? Old maps. Why is he called that? Well, he was in the war and he doesn't recognize the new maps with the new countries on it. He recognizes the old maps and he's pissed off about it. Oh, okay.
We call them old charts, actually.
Very well done. Very much.
Anyway, that's all for our discussion on ocean travel in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And thank you to Robert for joining us on this episode. Please take a second to engage with a like, follow, comment, and review to help push our engagement. And don't forget to subscribe to find future inspirations for your campaigns.
if you'd like to support us, we have a store with some merch and a donate button on our website. It's amimic.com, as well as a Patreon. This episode and others can also be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, most other podcast apps. Thanks for listening to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're going to get.
This has been an It's a Mimic production. Please check the show notes for this episode to see links, time codes, and credits, and don't forget to reach out and share your own inspirations.
Wow, solid. Really great episode. We went so deep on that. I can't believe how deep we got into that. That was fascinating, Robert. Thank you so much for jumping on that. I learned so much today.
No, I had a blast. I'm really, really glad I could chip in, and thank you all for powering through your hangovers. I think you did great.
I'm not too bad, actually.
Very, very accurate for naval tradition. You got something important tomorrow, get hammered the night before.
Yeah.
I actually have Megan's phone. She left it at the party last night, and so she's going to swing by here in about a half hour to pick it up.
Oh, I bet she's dying without her phone.
Yeah. We found out an hour after she left, and so I'm sitting there reaching out to everyone that she left with, going, "Hey, are you with Megan? We have her phone." And someone said, "She's already asleep." I'm like, "All right, well, it's 8:00. So she was drinking heavy in the sun to start off with. So I'm hoping that I'm not the most hungover person. It'll probably be Megan or Charlie, I think. But
You didn't hear the infestation comment, right? About the infestation I saw.
It came on right after. You need to tell him. Adam, you wouldn't even be able to come up with this if you tried.
I had a buddy of mine who was on board a ship, and she called me up, took the time to find a phone at sea, which, I mean, we have phones, it's just you got to wait in line. And she's like, "You'll never believe what happened. We had 30 cases of chlamydia traced to the same fleshlight."
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Like there's sharing with your brothers, and then there's sharing with your brothers. That's
It's like, do you create like a list, like I'm number 4 with Sheila, or was it just left in the shower? Or I can't imagine. Back to the theft comment earlier. Yeah, that thing probably got stolen and rolled around.
Oh, that's so gross. That's crazy.
God.
Yeah.
And it wasn't fucking clean, clearly. Like there's a level of desperation that I don't want to think about.
Yeah, the barrel boy thing, from what I know of, somebody being put in the barrel, that's not necessarily not true. And I did a bunch of boardings to go on board fishing boats, go on board that kind of thing in the Persian Gulf, to just talk to people, ask what they've seen, see if they need any help. And there was more than one time where I opened a closet, and the closet would just have a pallet made of rags and a wig hanging on a nail. It's like, well, it's an all male crew, so. Yeah,
I mean,
it needs must, I guess, but any port in storm is
that's the phrase. We don't kink shame on this podcast, but I often feel like maybe we oughta.
be clean. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't kink shame, but I do. Yeah, that's a
For a D&D podcast, the amount of stuff that comes up to the point where we have to have a hard rule that we don't kink shame. It's like, what are we talking about so often that we have to have that rule?
Literally dungeon masters, Terry. That is what we're up against.
first word of the game. Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Guys, unfortunately, I got to bounce because I got someone coming over. I got to clean my bathroom.
All right. I'm going to. So it's a lady friend then. You don't clean the bathroom for guy friends. You know what it is? It's fucking Fireball.
Yeah.
It's because it's got a lot of liquor and a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
And that sipping whiskey that we were wasting shooting.
Jesus. Yeah. Steve from the L5R series bought me a bottle of whiskey, and he's like, "I've heard really good things about it. It's an expensive bottle." And then we were shooting a bunch of stuff. I'm like, all right, pour shots. Holy shit. That was a sipping whiskey that we were just dying on.
No, but you're right about the Fireball. I do Jack Daniel's Fire, just another cinnamon whiskey, and you mix that with a Coke, can't even taste it anymore. It's nice, it's fun, and you're just hammering those back. Or we started doing one which was ginger beer, cinnamon whiskey, and apple whiskey all mixed.
That sounds delicious and deadly.
It tastes like oh, it's an autumn morning and I'm having my cup of tea and there's a pie cooling on the windowsill. I am blackout drunk. Like I'm fucking down. Like this is bad.
When stuff's too easy to drink, that's the problem. Because you just knock it back.
Yeah.
See you next Tuesday.